5 years after the Battle of Veltar Prime, Admiral Lee Hyun stood on the observation deck of the new Coalition Defense Academy, watching young cadets from a dozen species practice formation flying. The sight would have been impossible to imagine during the dark days of the Devourer War. The academy itself was a symbol of how much had changed. Built on a joint human-alien design, it combined the best of both approaches. Sleek alien architecture housed classrooms where students learned the value of redundant systems and analog backups. Crystal communication arrays worked alongside old-fashioned radio transmitters. "Admiral," called a familiar voice behind him. "The new class is ready for their first lesson." Hyun turned to see Park Soo-jin approaching, her uniform bearing the insignia of a full colonel in the Coalition Engineering Corps. The years had been kind to her, though she still carried the same no-nonsense attitude that had kept the Indomitable flying through impossible odds. "How are they looking?" he asked. "Eager," she replied with a smile, maybe a little too confident. Nothing like a few months of actually working with primitive technology to humble them. They walked together toward the main lecture hall, passing displays that would have seemed bizarre just a few years ago. A Veltari crystal computer sat next to a human mechanical calculator. A Nixari energy weapon was mounted beside an old-fashioned chemical rocket launcher. Each display carried a simple message. Different approaches, same goal. The lecture hall was packed with cadets from across Coalition space. Young Veltari with their crystalline features sat next to human students. Nexari energy beings flickered beside representatives of a dozen other species. All of them wore the same uniform. All carried the same rank insignia. As Hyun took the podium, he looked out at the sea of faces and remembered another gathering 5 years ago. Then, desperate leaders had gambled everything on outdated ships and forgotten tactics. Now that gamble had become the foundation of a new military doctrine. "Today we're going to talk about the principle of technological diversity," he began. "Can anyone tell me why the Coalition's most advanced fleets failed against the Devourers?" A young Veltari cadet raised her hand. "Because they all use similar technology, sir. The Devourers could adapt to energy-based weapons and quantum defenses because they had encountered them before." "Correct. And why did the human fleet succeed where others failed?" A human student answered this time. "Because our technology was so different from what the Devourers expected that they couldn't adapt quickly enough." "Also correct," Hyun nodded. "But there's a deeper lesson here. It wasn't just about having different technology. It was about having the courage to use approaches that others had dismissed as worthless." He gestured to the display screens around the hall, which showed images from the war. Ships that looked like museum pieces facing off against biomechanical nightmares. Ancient weapons punching holes through adaptive armor. Outdated tactics proving more effective than centuries of military evolution. "The Coalition made a mistake that many advanced civilizations make," Hyun continued. "We assumed that newer was always better. That progress meant abandoning the old ways entirely. But what we learned during the war is that sometimes the old ways survive because they work." Colonel Kim Dae-ho entered the hall, leading a group of practical demonstration equipment. His hair was grayer now, but he still moved with the confidence of someone who had faced impossible odds and won. Behind him, cadets wheeled in examples of both primitive and advanced weaponry. "Colonel Kim will now demonstrate why we train with both energy weapons and kinetic projectiles," Hyun announced. The demonstration was enlightening. Against adaptive armor, the energy weapons gradually became less effective as the target learned to counter them. But the simple chemical rockets maintained their stopping power regardless of how many times they were used. "The key principle," Kim explained to the fascinated cadets, "is redundancy through diversity. If the enemy adapts to one approach, you have another completely different method ready to use." After the lecture, Hyun made his way to the memorial garden at the center of the academy. Here, among flowering trees and peaceful fountains, stood monuments to those who had died in the war. The largest bore the names of human crews who had sacrificed themselves to save worlds they had never seen. Captain Oh Seung-woo's name was carved in stone alongside his crew from the Iron Will. Commander Jang Mi-young, who had survived the battle but died in a later engagement, was remembered with her characteristic grin captured in marble. Hundreds of other names filled the walls. Humans who had answered the call when the galaxy needed them most. They'd be proud. "You know," said a voice behind him. Hyun turned to see Choi Yun-hai approaching, her admiral's uniform marking her as his successor in the fleet command structure. She had taken over when he moved to the academy, bringing the same intuitive understanding of space navigation that had served them so well during the war. "Proud of what we've built here?" he asked. "Proud that their sacrifice meant something," she replied. "Look around. Every species in the coalition is learning to value diversity over conformity. Military academies across the galaxy are teaching courses on primitive tactics. Our maintenance crews are learning to work with analog systems alongside quantum computers." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the academy grounds in shades of gold and orange. In the distance, the sound of cadets practicing formation drills echoed across the courtyard. "I received an interesting report today," Yunhai said eventually. "Deep space monitors have detected new energy signatures at the galaxy's edge. Something we've never seen before." Yun felt a familiar chill. Another invasion? Maybe. Or maybe first contact with a new species. Either way, the coalition is ready now. We have fleets equipped with everything from quantum torpedoes to chemical rockets, tactics that range from energy field manipulation to ramming attacks. And most importantly, we have leaders who understand that there's no such thing as obsolete technology, only inappropriate applications. As they walked back toward the academy buildings, Hyun reflected on the long journey that had brought them here. The Indomitable now sat in the place of honor at the academy's entrance, her battle-scarred hull a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things are those that others overlook. Yoon Tae-min had written the definitive history of the Devourer War, documenting how humanity's primitive approach had saved the galaxy. His book was required reading at military academies across Coalition space. The title was simple: When Old Became New, Lessons in Tactical Diversity. Students from across the galaxy came to study at the academy, learning to appreciate the strengths of different approaches to problem-solving. Feltari engineers worked alongside human mechanics, each learning from the other's methods. Nexari strategists studied human psychological warfare techniques while humans learned energy field manipulation. The coalition that emerged from the war was stronger than what came before, not because it had better technology, but because it had learned to value all kinds of technology. The lesson had been written in blood and fire. Diversity was strength, and dismissing something as obsolete was often the first step toward disaster. As night fell over the academy, Hyun paused at his office window to watch the stars. Somewhere out there, the next challenge was waiting. When it came, they would be ready, not with the most advanced technology, but with the wisdom to use whatever worked. The galaxy had learned to remember that sometimes legends were born not from being the newest or most advanced, but from being exactly what was needed when everything else had failed. And in the deepest archives of the Academy, preserved for future generations, sat the simple words that had become the Coalition's new motto: no technology is obsolete if it gets the job done. Beltar Prime had once been beautiful beyond description. The crystal world caught starlight and transformed it into cascades of color that could be seen from orbit. Vast spires reached toward space like frozen lightning, each one a work of art that had taken centuries to grow. Now it was a nightmare. The Devourers had wrapped the planet in a web of organic matter that pulsed with sickly bioluminescence. Their ships, if they could be called ships, swarmed around the world like antibodies around an infection. Each vessel was a living thing, part machine and part creature, constantly shifting and adapting. "Sweet mother of space," whispered Kim Dae-ho as the human fleet approached the system. "There must be thousands of them." Captain Hyun studied the tactical display with grim determination. The Devourer fleet was unlike anything in Coalition databases. Their ships ranged from fighter-sized organisms to massive bioconstructs that dwarfed even the largest human dreadnoughts. "Remember the plan," he announced over the fleet communication channel. "We hit them fast and hard before they can adapt. No fancy maneuvers, no energy weapons, just good old-fashioned firepower." Admiral Kato, monitoring from a safe distance aboard a Coalition observation ship, watched as the primitive human fleet advanced toward certain destruction. Part of her admired their courage. Another part thought they were all insane. The first indication that something was wrong came from the Devourer picket ships. These smaller organisms normally detected approaching threats from light years away and sent out adaptation signals to the main fleet. But as the human ships approached, the pickets seemed confused. On the bridge of the Iron Will, Captain Oh Seung-woo smiled grimly as his sensors showed the enemy's hesitation. They don't know what to make of us. To their sensors, we probably look like floating scrap metal. "Sir," called his weapons officer, "we're in range of their outer perimeter." "Open fire with everything we have," Xiangwu ordered. The Iron Will's massive railgun spoke first, hurling a tungsten projectile at a significant fraction of light speed. The slug tore through 3 Devourer ships before losing momentum, their biomechanical hulls offering no more resistance than tissue paper. Across the human fleet, chemical rockets and kinetic weapons opened up on the startled enemy. The Devourers had evolved to absorb energy, to adapt to quantum fields and reality distortions. They had no defense against simple chunks of metal moving very fast. "Direct hit on the command cluster," reported Zhang Miyang from the Stubborn Mule. Her converted cargo hauler was launching old-fashioned missiles with chemical warheads. "Their bioships are taking massive damage." But the Devourers learned quickly. As the battle progressed, their ships began to adapt even to kinetic weapons. Armor thickened. Point defense systems grew from their hulls like cancerous growths. The element of surprise was fading fast. "They're adapting to our attacks," Park Soo-jin reported from the Indomitable. "Their hulls are hardening against projectile impacts." Hyun gritted his teeth as he watched Devourer ships begin to shrug off attacks that had been devastatingly effective moments before. "Then we'll have to hit them harder." The human fleet pressed their attack with desperate fury. Ships that had been designed for patrol duty and cargo hauling threw themselves against biomechanical monsters 10 times their size. The Sturdy Oak, a converted mining vessel, rammed directly into a Devourer cruiser and detonated her cargo hold full of chemical explosives. Captain Bei Ji-wan, coordinating the tactical situation from her command ship, realized they needed a new approach. All ships concentrate fire on the web surrounding the planet. If we can disrupt their connection to Veltar Prime, we might be able to. Her transmission was cut short as Devourer fighters swarmed her vessel. The small bioships moved like schools of predatory fish, their organic weapons spitting acid that ate through human armor plating. "We're losing ships," Kim Dae-ho reported grimly. "The faithful service just went down. The Never Surrender is venting atmosphere." But even as human ships died, they accomplished something no coalition fleet had managed. They were making the Devourers pay for every meter of space. Each human vessel that fell took several enemy ships with it, their crude weapons punching holes that the biomechanical healing couldn't quickly repair. On Veltar Prime itself, something stirred in the crystal depths. The planet's surviving inhabitants, trapped in underground shelters for months, felt vibrations through the very stone as the battle raged above. Hope flickered in alien hearts that had given up all possibility of rescue. "Sir," Yoon Tae-min called out excitedly, "I'm receiving transmissions from the planet's surface. The crystal resonance chambers are still intact. If we can break through the bioweb, the Veltari survivors might be able to help us." Hyun made a decision that would have been unthinkable in any normal military situation. "Oh, Seung-woo, can the Iron Will punch through that web?" The old captain's voice crackled over the communication channel. "She's taken a beating, but her armor's still holding. We've got one shot with the main gun before the power core overloads." "Do it." The ancient dreadnought turned toward the planet, her hull streaming atmosphere from a dozen breaches. Devourer ships converged on her like sharks sensing wounded prey. Her escort vessels, the few that remained, formed up around her in a protective formation. For humanity, Oh Seung-woo broadcast on all frequencies, and for everyone who said we were obsolete. The Iron Will fired her railgun one last time. The massive tungsten slug, accelerated by capacitors older than most species' spaceflight programs, tore through the bioweb like a spear through silk. The organic structure around Veltar Prime shuddered and began to collapse. As the web fell away, crystal spires across the planet's surface began to sing. The Veltari had built their world as one massive resonance chamber, and now that chamber was free to act. Harmonic frequencies that could shatter matter at the molecular level swept through the Devourer fleet. The bioships, evolved to adapt to energy weapons and quantum effects, had no defense against simple acoustic resonance. They came apart like objects caught in an earthquake, their biological components unable to maintain cohesion against the planet's song. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The Iron Will disappeared in a cloud of enemy fire, taking Captain Oh Seung-woo and his crew with her. The Stubborn Mule was drifting powerless, her hull cracked open like an egg. Across the human fleet, nearly half their ships were destroyed or crippled. Fall back to minimum safe distance, Hyun ordered. We've done what we came to do. As the surviving human ships limped away from Veltar Prime, Admiral Cato watched in amazement. The primitive fleet had accomplished what the Coalition's most advanced forces could not. They had liberated a core world and dealt the Devourers their first real defeat. Jung Mi-young's voice came over the fleet channel, weak but triumphant. Well, that was fun. Should we do it again? Despite everything, Hyun found himself laughing. Let's see if we can find some more museums to raid first. The battle for Veltar Prime was over, but the war was far from won. The human fleet had proven that the Devourers could be hurt, could be defeated. Now they had to spread that knowledge to every surviving world in the galaxy. Sometimes the old ways really were the best ways, especially when fighting an enemy that had forgotten how deadly simple determination could be. The sight that greeted Admiral Cato at the human fleet rendezvous point was almost heartbreaking. Dozens of ancient ships floated in formation, their hulls bearing the scars of decades in service and retirement. Some still had museum plaques welded to their sides. Others showed obvious signs of hasty repairs. The Iron Will was the largest vessel present, a human dreadnought that had been built over 60 years ago. Her captain, Oh Sung-woo, was nearly as old as his ship. Gray-haired and weathered, he moved slowly but with the confidence of someone who had spent his life in command. "Admiral," he said as he joined the briefing aboard the Indomitable. "It's good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Cato nodded. She remembered Sung-woo from the early days of human integration into the Coalition. He had been one of the few human officers who earned respect from the alien races. Despite commanding what they considered primitive vessels, Commander Jang Mi-young arrived next, her uniform crisp despite coming out of retirement. Her ship, the Stubborn Mule, was a converted cargo hauler that she had somehow turned into an effective fighting vessel during the border conflicts of 30 years. "Go, the gang's all here," she said with a grin that didn't quite hide the worry in her eyes. "Just like old times, except now the whole galaxy is counting on us." The briefing room was crowded with human officers who had thought their fighting days were over. Chief Tactician Bae Ji-won, formerly a Coalition strategic planner, studied the tactical displays with intense focus. Her experience with both human and alien military doctrine made her invaluable for planning their desperate mission. "Let's review what we know," Cato began. "The Devourers have conquered or destroyed every major Coalition world. Their biomechanical ships absorb energy-based attacks and adapt to any technology they encounter. Traditional tactics are useless." She gestured to the display showing the enemy advance. However, Captain Hyun's theory appears correct. They show no interest in systems with primitive technology. They've bypassed dozens of human colonies without attacking. "Because we're not worth their time," muttered one of the younger officers. "No," Bae Ji-won corrected. "Because our technology doesn't register as a threat in their adaptation matrix. They've encountered energy weapons, quantum technology, reality manipulation. But chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles, those are beneath their notice." Park Soo-jin spoke up from her position near the engineering displays. "We've been analyzing the wreckage from the Coalition fleets. The Devourers have biological components that seem designed to absorb and redirect energy. But there's no indication they've adapted to simple physical damage." "You mean shooting them with bullets might actually work?" asked Jang Mi-young. "Big bullets," Kim Dae-ho added with grim satisfaction. "Delivered at high velocity." The plan that emerged was desperate but simple. The human fleet would engage the Devourers using weapons and tactics that hadn't changed in centuries. No energy shields, no quantum torpedoes, no reality-warping technology. Just metal projectiles, chemical explosives, and the stubborn refusal to retreat that humans had always been known for. "The Coalition survivors will provide support," Cato explained, "but only from a distance. Any ship with advanced technology that gets too close will be adapted to and destroyed." Captain Hyun looked around the room at the assembled officers. These were people who had been pushed aside, forgotten, treated as relics from a more primitive time. Now they were the galaxy's last hope. "What's our target?" he asked. "Veltar Prime," Cato replied. The room fell silent. The crystal world had been the crown jewel of Coalition space, home to billions of beings and defended by the most advanced fleet in the galaxy. Intelligence suggests the Devourers are using it as a staging ground for their next phase of expansion. Oh Seung-woo whistled low. "That's a tough nut to crack even under normal circumstances. And if it's crawling with these bioships, We have one advantage, Bei Ji-1 interjected. They won't see us coming. Every ship they've faced has used advanced stealth technology or energy masking. Our ships are so primitive, they might not show up on their sensors until we're right on top of them. The next week was spent in frantic preparation. Human engineers worked around the clock to retrofit the ancient ships with whatever weapons they could find. The Iron Will received a massive railgun that ran the length of her hull. The stubborn mule was loaded with chemical rockets that would have been considered antiques in any other military. Park Soo-jin pushed the Indomitable's engines beyond their rated capacity, installing backup systems and redundant controls. If we're going to fight monsters, she declared, we need to be tougher than they are. Meanwhile, human colonies across the Outer Rim emptied their armories and museums. Kinetic weapons that had been displayed as historical curiosities were hastily mounted on ship hulls. Ammunition that had been stored for decades was distributed to the fleet. The aliens watched these preparations with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. To their eyes, the humans were preparing to fight an advanced alien invasion with museum pieces and antiques. This is madness, the Veltari representative declared during one planning session. You cannot defeat biomechanical adaptation with primitive chemical weapons. Maybe not, Hyun replied, but we're going to try anyway. It's what humans do. As the fleet prepared to depart, Yoon Tae-min intercepted communications from across Coalition space. The message was spreading through the surviving populations. The humans were mounting a counterattack. The species that had been dismissed as primitive were taking the fight to an enemy that had crushed the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They're calling us crazy, he reported. Some are saying it's a suicide mission. They're probably right, Oh Sung-woo said with a laugh. But sometimes crazy is exactly what the situation calls for. The human fleet departed in loose formation, their chemical drives leaving visible exhaust trails that any civilized military would consider a tactical disaster. To the Devourer's sensors, they probably looked like space junk drifting through the void. As they traveled toward their target, the crew of the Indomitable settled into the familiar rhythm of a ship at war. The bridge became a hub of constant activity as they monitored communications, checked weapons systems, and plotted their approach to Veltar Prime. You know, Park Soo-jin said during one of the quiet moments, I never thought I'd be grateful for being called primitive. Hyun nodded, watching the stars streak past their forward viewport. Funny how things work out. 50 years ago they told us our way of fighting was obsolete. Now it might be the only thing that can save them. Think it'll work? Asked Choi Yun-hai. Only one way to find out, Hyun replied. But I'd rather go down fighting than hiding in the Outer Rim waiting for the end. The fleet pressed on toward what had once been the most beautiful world in Coalition space. Behind them, the survivors of a dozen alien races watched and waited, their hopes resting on ships they had once mocked as primitive relics. In the depths of space, the Devourers continued their systematic consumption of advanced civilizations, unaware that something old and stubborn was coming for them. Something that didn't rely on energy shields or quantum computers or reality manipulation. Something that still believed in the simple effectiveness of hitting your enemy very hard with big chunks of metal. The first attack came without warning. Admiral Rei Kato was reviewing supply reports when the emergency signals started flooding her command center. Red lights flashed across every screen as panicked voices filled the communication channels. Admiral, we're losing contact with the Nexari homeworld. The crystal cities of Veltar Prime have gone dark. Something is attacking the core worlds. Kato stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what she was hearing. The core worlds were the most heavily defended systems in the galaxy. They had shields that could stop stars from exploding and weapons that could crack planets in half. Nothing should be able to threaten them. Show me, she ordered. The main display lit up with a tactical map of Coalition space. Red indicators were spreading like a disease across the inner systems. One by one, the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were simply disappearing. The few surviving ships that managed to escape painted a terrifying picture. The attackers called themselves the Devourers, and they moved through space in massive swarms of organic ships that seemed to be alive. These creatures absorbed energy weapons like they were food, growing stronger with each attack. The Coalition's finest fleets rushed to defend their homeworlds, armed with the most advanced technology in the known galaxy. They lasted minutes. Captain Lee Hyun watched the reports from the bridge of the Indomitable with growing horror. His crew gathered around him, their faces pale as they absorbed the scale of the disaster. "How is this possible?" whispered Park Soo-jin. "The Coalition has weapons that can destroy entire solar systems." "Apparently not anymore," Kim Dae-ho replied grimly. "Every report says the same thing. Their weapons just make these devourers stronger." Yoon Tae-min looked up from his communication station. "Sir, I'm getting scattered transmissions from the front lines. The survivors are saying these creatures somehow adapt to everything thrown at them. Energy weapons, quantum torpedoes, reality disruptors, nothing works." Hyun studied the tactical display showing the enemy advance. The pattern was clear. The devourers were hitting the most technologically advanced worlds first, systematically destroying anything that could pose a threat to them. "They're learning," he realized aloud. "Every attack teaches them how to counter Coalition technology better." Admiral Kato's flagship Eternal Glory was a masterpiece of Coalition engineering. Her hull was made from crystallized starlight. Her weapons could tear holes in space itself, and her shields operated in 17 different dimensions. She was the most powerful warship ever built. It took the Devourers exactly 4 minutes to destroy. Her Kato barely made it to an escape pod before her beautiful ship was consumed by creatures that looked like a nightmare fusion of insect and machine. As she watched through the pod's small window, the Devourers tore apart her vessel and absorbed its energy, their forms growing visibly larger and more complex. The surviving Coalition forces retreated to the Outer Rim territories, the same backwater systems they had once ignored. Ironically, these forgotten regions were now the safest places in the galaxy. The Devourers seemed uninterested in areas with primitive technology. When the emergency council meeting was called, Hyun found himself in the strange position of being one of the senior officers left alive. Most of the Coalition's leadership had died defending their homeworlds with their advanced fleets. The meeting took place aboard a hastily converted cargo station. The once proud alien leaders sat in simple metal chairs, their holographic projectors and floating thrones lost with their homeworlds. They looked lost and broken. "We need options," Admiral Kato said. She had managed to take command of the surviving forces, though there wasn't much left to command. "Our conventional weapons are useless. Our most advanced ships only make them stronger. We need something they haven't seen before." The Veltari representative, his crystal form cracked and dimmed, spoke in a voice like breaking glass. "What is there left to try? We have used every weapon, every technology known to our civilizations. These creatures adapt to everything." "Not everything," Hyun said quietly. The room turned to look at him. A human captain speaking up in a war council was almost unthinkable a few weeks ago. Now desperate times had changed many rules. "Explain," Kato ordered. Hyun stood, feeling the weight of alien eyes upon him. "The Devourers have adapted to your technology because they've encountered it before. These energy signatures we found, they're ancient. This isn't their first time in our galaxy." He gestured to the tactical display. "But look at their targets. They hit every advanced world, every system with high-tech defenses. They're avoiding the Outer Rim where most human colonies are located." "Of course they are," snapped the Nexari representative, his energy form flickering with irritation. "There's nothing worth taking in those primitive systems." "Exactly," Hyun replied. "They don't see us as a threat. To them, we're so primitive we don't even register as military targets." Park Soo-jin caught on first. "Our technology is so old, so basic, that they don't have defenses against it. Chemical rockets, ballistic weapons, analog computers," Kim Dae-ho added, understanding dawning in his voice. "Everything we use is thousands of years behind their adaptation protocols." The alien leaders looked skeptical. The Veltari representative actually laughed, a sound like wind chimes breaking. "You suggest we fight beings that destroyed our most powerful weapons with your crude missiles and metal bullets?" "It's better than sitting here waiting to die," Hyun replied firmly. Admiral Kato studied the human captain for a long moment. The woman who had once commanded the most advanced fleet in history was now considering putting her faith in outdated human technology. "How many ships do you have access to?" she asked finally. "The human colonial fleet maintains about 2,000 vessels," Hyun reported. "Most are cargo haulers and patrol boats, but we still have some military ships in reserve. Old ones that the Coalition was going to scrap. And you think these ancient ships can succeed where our most advanced fleets failed?" Hyun met her gaze steadily. "I think they're our only chance. The Devourers have spent eons learning to counter advanced technology. But they've never had to deal with someone too stubborn to upgrade. 3 days later, activation orders went out to human ships across the Outer Rim. Vessels that had been collecting dust in military graveyards were hastily refitted and crewed. Veterans who had been forced into retirement found themselves recalled to active duty. Captain Oh Sung-woo received his orders while tending his garden on a quiet farming world. The old battleship captain read the message twice before believing it. They wanted him to take command of the Iron Will, his old ship that had been mothballed for 30 years. Commander Jang Mi-young was running a small shipping company when her orders arrived. She had been one of the coalition's most decorated human officers before the peace forced her into civilian life. Now they needed her experience with primitive warfare. Across human space, forgotten warriors answered the call. They emerged from retirement homes, farming colonies, and civilian jobs to cruise ships that the galaxy had written off as obsolete. The Indomitable became the flagship of humanity's ragtag fleet by default. As one of the few human military vessels still in active service, she was practically a modern warship compared to the museum pieces they were dragging out of storage. "Well," Park Soo-jin said as they watched the old ships limping toward their rendezvous point. "This should be interesting." Hyun nodded, watching as ships older than some civilizations took their places in formation. They looked pathetic compared to the sleek alien vessels they had once served alongside. But as the Devourers continued their advance toward the Outer Rim, these relics might be the galaxy's last hope. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways, especially when fighting an enemy that had learned to defeat everything new. Captain Lee Hyun stared out at the endless field of space junk floating before his ship. Broken pieces of metal, old satellites, and scrapped vessels drifted in the darkness like a graveyard of forgotten dreams. This was his life now, cleaning up the galaxy's trash. The Indomitable was an old human frigate, built back when humanity still thought they were special. Her hull was scarred and patched, her engines loud and smoky. The aliens called ships like this primitive and crude. They weren't wrong, but Hyun still loved the old girl. She had character, something the sleek alien ships seemed to lack. "Captain, we've got another debris field ahead," called out Choi Yun-hai from the navigation station. Her voice carried the same tired tone they all shared these days. "Looks like the remains of an old cargo hauler." Hyun nodded. "Take us in nice and slow." "Park, how are our engines holding up?" Chief Engineer Park Soo-jin looked up from her console, wiping grease from her hands. "They're running hot, but they'll hold. These old engines were built to last, not like the fancy stuff the Coalition uses now." The bridge of the Indomitable was cramped and functional. No holographic displays or floating controls like the alien ships had. Just solid metal buttons, physical switches, and screens that actually had frames around them. The aliens found it all very amusing when they visited. Hyun had learned to ignore their barely hidden smiles. Kim Dae-ho, their weapons officer, turned from his station. "Sir, why are we even out here?" "We used to be warriors. Now we're garbage collectors." His voice was bitter, and Hyun couldn't blame him. They all felt the sting of being pushed aside. "Because this is the job they gave us," Hyun replied quietly, "and we do our job." 50 years ago, everything had been different. Humanity had been expanding through the stars, building their own empire with ships like the Indomitable. Then they met the Galactic Coalition. Suddenly, human technology looked like stone tools compared to alien science. The Veltari built ships from living crystal that could repair themselves. The Nexari didn't even need physical ships. They were beings of pure energy who traveled in constructs of light. Compared to them, human ships with their chemical rockets and metal hulls seemed pathetic. "The Coalition knows best," the human leaders had said. "We must adapt to survive in this larger galaxy." So humanity had tried to upgrade, tried to use alien technology, but they were always behind, always playing catch-up. Eventually, they were given simple jobs: cargo hauling, waste management, basic patrol duty in empty sectors. Ships like the Indomitable were supposed to be scrapped or turned into museums. Only Hyun's stubborn refusal to give her up had kept her flying. The Coalition found it easier to let him keep his old ship than argue about it. As long as he did his job cleaning up space debris, they didn't care what he flew. "Contact on sensors," announced Yoon Tae-min from the communication station. "It's a Coalition patrol ship." "Looks like they're hailing us." The main screen flickered to life, showing the angular face of a Veltari officer. His crystalline features reflected the light in patterns that humans found hard to read. "Human vessel, this is Patrol Leader Zithtal. You are to investigate a disturbance in Sector 47. some kind of energy reading that our sensors cannot identify. Hyun straightened in his chair. An actual mission that wasn't garbage collection? Understood, patrol leader. We'll check it out. Do not engage anything you find, the alien continued. Simply observe and report. Your primitive sensors might detect something our advanced systems cannot. The way he said primitive made it clear he didn't expect much from them. The connection closed, and Hyun turned to his crew. You heard him. Chunhee, set course for Sector 47, everyone else stay alert. If the coalition can't figure out what's happening, it might actually be dangerous. As the Indomitable changed course, Park Soo-jin spoke up from her station. Captain, do you ever wonder if we made the right choice? Joining the coalition, I mean. Giving up our independence? Hyun thought about that for a moment. We didn't have much choice. Fight a war we couldn't win, or accept being junior partners in something bigger than ourselves. Junior partners. Kim Dae-ho muttered. More like servants. Maybe, Hyun admitted. But we're still here. Still flying. Still human. That has to count for something. The journey to Sector 47 took 6 hours. It was a dead region of space. Empty except for a few asteroids and the occasional comet. Nothing that should produce energy readings strong enough to puzzle coalition sensors. I'm picking up something, Yun-hai reported as they approached the coordinates. It's strange. Like an echo of something that used to be there. Yoon Taiman worked his instruments trying to make sense of the readings. There are definitely energy traces here, but they're not from any known technology. Not human, not Veltari, not Nixari, something else entirely. Yoon felt a chill run down his spine. In a galaxy full of advanced alien races, finding something that none of them recognized was deeply unsettling. Any idea how old these traces are? Hard to say with our equipment, Soo-jin replied. But if I had to guess, I'd say very old. Maybe thousands of years. They spent the next few hours taking detailed readings with their primitive sensors. The aliens might laugh at human technology, but it was thorough and reliable. Sometimes the old ways of doing things had advantages that fancy new methods missed. As they worked, Hyun couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled onto something important. Something that would change everything. The energy traces felt wrong somehow, like a scar on space itself. Captain, Yoon Taemin called out, I'm getting reports from other sectors. Similar energy readings appearing across coalition space. Whatever this is, it's not isolated to here. Hyun stared at the readings on his screen. After 50 years of peace and prosperity under the coalition's protection, something new was stirring in the galaxy. Something that made the most advanced races nervous. Compile everything we've found and send it to the coalition command, he ordered. Mark it as urgent priority. As the Indomitable began its journey back to base, Hyun couldn't help but feel that their days as simple garbage collectors were coming to an end. The galaxy was about to remind everyone that some threats couldn't be solved with advanced technology alone. Sometimes it took something primitive and stubborn to face the unknown.